The first thing I heard that morning was not my alarm, not a trash drop, not somebody's dog losing its mind at a squirrel. It was metal screaming against wood like someone was trying to beat the morning out of my front yard. I remember opening one eye, seeing 5:58 on the clock, and thinking, in that foggy, half-awake way your brain tries to protect you, maybe a delivery van tripped the curb, maybe a branch fell, maybe anything except what was actually happening. Then I opened the security camera app on my phone, and there he was, plain as sunrise, my neighbor from 2 doors down, Calvin Brewer, standing at the end of my driveway in pressed khaki shorts and a golf polo, swinging a sledgehammer into my mailbox like it owed him money. One hit, then another, and every time the hammer came down, the post jerked sideways until the whole thing finally snapped, folded over, and spilled mail, screws, splinters, and bent aluminum across the grass. And the part that still bothers me, even now, is not that he did it, it is how calm he looked doing it. Calvin was not yelling. He was not red-faced. He was not acting like a man who had snapped after some long neighborhood feud. He looked peaceful, almost satisfied, like he was pruning a hedge or fixing a sprinkler head. And after the last swing, he actually stepped back, took a sip from a silver travel mug, and nodded at the wreckage like he'd just improved the property value. I threw on yesterday's sweatshirt, shoved my feet into sneakers with no socks, and walked outside before I had a single smart sentence prepared. The air was cool in that early Texas morning way, the kind where everything looks clean before the heat comes down and ruins everybody's mood. And Calvin turned toward me with this tiny, polite smile, like I had caught him watering my plants instead of destroying federal-adjacent property in my driveway. "Morning, Mason," he said, real casual. I just stood there, staring at what used to be my mailbox, then at the hammer in his hand, then back at him. "Calvin," I said, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" He lifted his mug like we were at a cookout, correcting a compliance issue. "Your mailbox was sitting too far forward. It was blocking the sight line near the curve. I figured I would save the board some paperwork." Now, when someone says something that stupid with that much confidence, your brain does this strange little pause, because part of you waits for the punchline, and when the punchline never comes, you realize you are not dealing with confusion, you are dealing with certainty, which is much worse. Calvin Brewer had lived in Willow Creek Estates for maybe 8 years, and in those 8 years he had somehow convinced himself that the neighborhood needed him the way a small town needs a fire department. He was not the association president, he was not on the architectural committee, he was not even the guy who organized the July barbecue, but he walked around like the bylaws had been carved into stone tablets and handed specifically to him. He measured fence stains, photographed trash bins left out past noon, complained about basketball hoops, holiday lights, political signs, garden flags, cars parked half an inch too close to the curb, and once, and I swear this is true, he reported a widow named Mrs. Dunlap because her wind chimes were creating what he called an inconsistent auditory environment. Most of us treated Calvin like bad weather, annoying but survivable. You waited them out, you smiled when necessary, and you never gave him more attention than he deserved. The problem was, I had recently become his favorite hobby. A few weeks before the mailbox incident, I put in a new cedar post and black metal mailbox after the old one finally rusted through, and I will admit, I was proud of it. It looked good, simple, clean, nothing fancy. But after a year of working double shifts and fixing little things around the house one weekend at a time, that mailbox felt like proof I was finally catching up with my own life. Calvin noticed it the same day it went in. He warped by twice that afternoon, slow both times, hands clasped behind his back like an inspector at a crime scene. The next morning there was a type note tucked under my doormat. "Your mailbox may be in violation of community placement standards. Please correct immediately to avoid escalation." No name, of course, because people like Calvin love authority until it requires accountability. I threw it away. 2 days later there was another note, this one laminated, which honestly made me laugh harder than it should have. "This is your final neighborly warning." That word neighborly did a lot of work for a threat written in 12-point font. But here is the thing. I had been around enough passive-aggressive suburban nonsense to know better than to rely on vibes, so I pulled the association guide from the kitchen drawer, found the mailbox section, and measured everything. Distance from curb, height from road surface, distance from driveway edge, clearance near the curve, every boring little number you can imagine. It was compliant. Not kind of compliant. Not close enough compliant. Completely compliant. I took photos with the tape measure visible in every shot, saved screenshots of the rules, and even emailed the property manager asking her to confirm, which did the next afternoon in one sentence that felt boring at the time and priceless later. Your mailbox placement appears to meet current Willow Creek standards. I did not tell Calvin any of that, because I did not think I needed to. That was my mistake. Or maybe it was not a mistake. Maybe it was the one thing that let Calvin show everybody who he really was. So there we were at 5:58 in the morning, me in a faded Rangers sweatshirt, him holding a sledgehammer, my mailbox lying across my lawn like a casualty, and he had the nerve to look inconvenienced by my tone. You destroyed my property, I said. He exhaled through his nose, like I was being difficult. I corrected a hazard, he said. He crossed onto my driveway and smashed my mailbox. Mason, he said, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor. Someday you're going to understand that rules exist for a reason. I looked at him for a second, and I could feel it, that hot little pull in my chest telling me to yell, to step closer, to give him the driveway scene he clearly wanted, because Calvin wanted witnesses. He wanted noise. He wanted me angry enough that later he could say I had been aggressive, unstable, threatening, all the usual words people use when their own behavior needs a distraction. So I did the only thing that felt unnatural in the moment and smart 5 minutes later. I nodded. Okay, I said. That one word bothered him more than shouting would have. His eyebrows twitched. Okay? He repeated. Yeah. I said, looking down at the broken post, then back at him. Okay, I'm going inside now. He gave this little laugh, sharp and confused. That's it? I shrugged. For now. And I walked back into the house with my hand shaking so badly I had to grip the door handle twice before it turned. Inside, I leaned against the kitchen counter and let myself breathe, because staying calm in front of someone is not the same as feeling calm, and anybody who tells you otherwise is selling something. Through the front window, I watched Calvin stand there for almost a full minute, waiting for the argument to restart without him, and he picked up his hammer, climbed into his spotless white SUV, and drove away like a man leaving a job site. The moment he turned the corner, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started building a folder. Security footage, timestamps, photos from before, photos from after, the association rulebook, the property manager's email, the anonymous notes, the laminated final neighborly warning, which I had not thrown away because my wife, Rachel, is smarter than me and had pulled it from the trash saying, one day this weirdo is going to make paperwork necessary. By 7:15, I had filed a police report. By 8:30, I had backed up the video in 3 different places. And by noon, I made one boring little phone call to the local post office that Calvin never saw coming because he thought he had started a fight over a mailbox, when what he had actually done was kick the first domino in a line that ran straight through the entire neighborhood. That phone call should have been nothing. Just one of those dull adult errands you handle while standing in your kitchen, still wearing the clothes you slept in, holding cold coffee and trying not to sound as irritated as you feel. But the woman at the post office, a clerk named Denise with the calm voice of somebody who had survived every kind of human nonsense, asked me to come in with photos, proof of address, and the police report number. So that afternoon I drove over to the Cedar Bend branch, parked between a landscaping truck and a minivan full of soccer stickers, and walked inside with my little folder of evidence tucked under my arm like I was applying for a mortgage instead of trying to replace a mailbox some retired insurance adjuster had murdered before breakfast. Denise looked at the pictures, and looked at me, looked at the pictures again, and made that face government employees make when they are not surprised, just disappointed on behalf of civilization. She said, well, until a replacement is installed and verified by the carrier, your mail is going to be held here. I said, sure, that makes sense. Then she clicked around on her computer for a second and said, actually, this might affect more than just your address. I remember leaning a little closer, because that was the first sentence all day that made my stomach shift. Would do me more than my address. She turned the monitor slightly, not enough for me to see private information, just enough to show me a route map with colored little blocks and lines, and she explained that our street had been reorganized a few years back after a road extension went in behind the subdivision, and my mailbox location had become part of a shared delivery checkpoint for several homes along the bend, especially for parcels that were scanned in batches before the carrier entered the back loop. I will be honest, I did not understand every technical detail, and I'm not going to pretend I did, because nobody wants to hear a man explain postal logistics with fake confidence. But I understood the important part. If the checkpoint was unavailable, certain packages tied to that stretch of the route could be held at the branch or distribution center until the carrier confirmed the route was clear again. I asked, so people might have to come pick up their packages? Denise gave me a look that said, "Welcome to consequences, sir." "Possibly," she said. "Depends on how the scans come through." I signed the paperwork, thanked her, and walked out feeling strange. Happy exactly. Not even vindicated yet. Just aware that Calvin had swung that hammer at my yard and somehow hit the whole street. When I got home, Rachel was at the table with her laptop open, grading essays, because she teaches 8th grade English and has the kind of patience I only pretend to have. And when I told her what Denise said, she took off her glasses and stared at me for a long second. So Calvin may have interrupted package delivery for half a block. Maybe, I said. She leaned back, and I could see her trying not to smile. Because Rachel is a kind person, but she is not a saint. "Mason," she said, "that man is about to become very unpopular with people who order dog food online." For the first couple of days, nothing obvious happened. The broken mailbox sat in the garage like evidence in a small-town trial. My mail was on hold, and Calvin avoided walking past our house, which was new, because normally he patrolled that sidewalk like it paid hourly. I sent the full folder to the Willow Creek HOA board, including the security video, the before measurements, the property manager's confirmation, and both notes, especially the laminated final neighborly warning, because if a man takes the time to laminate his own threat, I believe the court of public opinion deserves to admire the craftsmanship. I expected a polite response in maybe a week. Instead, the first sign of trouble came from my neighbor Tasha, who lived across the bend with her husband and their 2 kids. I was dragging the trash can back up the driveway when she walked over holding her phone like it had personally betrayed her. "Hey, did you get any packages today?" she asked. I almost laughed, because standing 10 feet from the spot where my mailbox had been beaten to death, that was a complicated question. "No," I said. "Why?" She frowned and turned the screen toward me. Her daughter's birthday decorations were marked as arrived at the local facility, then suddenly delayed for pickup verification. I told her what the post office had told me. Careful not to dramatize it. Just facts. Because facts were doing pretty well on their own. Tasha looked at the empty patch near my curb, then looked down the street toward Calvin's house, and her face changed in a way I can only describe as suburban thunder. "Wait," she said. "This is because Calvin broke your mailbox?" I said, "That appears to be part of it." She closed her eyes and whispered something I will not repeat because her kids were within earshot. And so was Jesus. By the next morning, 2 more neighbors had texted me. Mr. Alvarez from the corner had a prescription delayed. A young couple named Ben and Marcy, who had a newborn and permanently tight faces, had formula accessories and bottle parts held at the distribution center. Then came Melissa Grant, who ran a home bakery and depended on weekly deliveries of packaging supplies. She knocked on my door holding a printed tracking page, because Melissa is the kind of woman who brings paperwork to a conversation, and honestly, I respect that. She asked if I knew why half the route had turned into a treasure hunt. I showed her the broken post in my garage. Then I showed her the video. She watched Calvin lift that hammer, watched him bring it down once, twice, 3 times, and by the 4th swing her mouth was open. "He did this in broad daylight?" she said. "Technically early daylight," I said. She did not laugh. She just shook her head and said, "I have 4 dozen cupcake boxes sitting somewhere because Captain Sidewalk wanted to play sheriff." That was the phrase that stuck. Captain Sidewalk. By Friday evening, people were saying it with the kind of cheerful cruelty only neighborhoods can produce. Captain Sidewalk cost me 40 minutes at the post office. Captain Sidewalk delayed my dog's allergy meds. Captain Sidewalk made my husband drive to Cedar Bend during lunch, and he came back with rage fries. And through all of this, I did not post the video online. I did not send a blast email. I did not stand on the corner telling my side like a campaign speech. I did not need to. The story moved the way neighborhood stories move, through driveways, group texts, porch conversations, and people asking one simple question: why am I picking up a package that should have been dropped at my door? Calvin, meanwhile, made the fatal mistake of trying to explain himself. On Saturday morning, he cornered Tasha near the community mail kiosk and told her he had acted in the interest of safety. She told him her daughter's birthday banner was sitting behind a counter because he got into a fight with a mailbox. He told Mr. Alvarez that sometimes enforcement required uncomfortable action. Mr. Alvarez, who is 72 and normally gentle as warm bread, looked at him and said, "My blood pressure medication was uncomfortable too, Calvin." Then the HOA responded. The email came from the board president, Margaret Hensley, a retired school principal with silver hair, perfect posture, and a reputation for being sweet right up until someone confused kindness with weakness. Her message was copied to me, Calvin, the property manager, and the full board. It was written in that terrifyingly professional tone that sounds polite until you realize every sentence is a locked door. She stated that after reviewing submitted footage and documentation, the board found no evidence that my mailbox had violated placement standards. She stated that no resident, volunteer, committee member, or concerned neighbor had the authority to enter another homeowner's property and alter, remove, or destroy any structure. Then she wrote the sentence that people repeated for months. "Mr. Brewer, your personal interpretation of a rule does not create power you were never given." Rachel read that line out loud twice, then said, "I want Margaret to write my obituary." Calvin did not take it well. That afternoon he stood on his front porch with printed pages in one hand and his phone in the other, calling people, waving his arms, pacing in circles. He tried to say the board was overreacting. He tried to say I had manipulated the situation. He tried to say the video did not show the broader safety context, which is a beautiful phrase for a man on camera demolishing a mailbox before 6 in the morning. But the problem with video is that it does not care about your preferred narrative. It just sits there, rude and accurate. The fines came next. First a community conduct violation, then an unauthorized property damage assessment, then daily penalties until restitution was arranged and the replacement approved. Calvin appealed. The appeal was denied. He requested a special hearing. Margaret gave him one, because Margaret believed in process, and process was exactly what Calvin had skipped. I attended on Zoom from my dining room table with Rachel sitting just off camera, eating pretzels like it was a courtroom drama. Calvin wore a blazer, which somehow made the whole thing worse, and he argued that he had reasonably believed the mailbox created a danger near the curve. Margaret asked if he had reported the danger through the proper channel. He said he had left notices. She asked if he had signed them. He cleared his throat. She asked if he had received authorization to remove or damage my property. He said, "I believed immediate action was necessary." Margaret folded her hands and said, "Mr. Brewer, belief is not authorization." I almost felt bad for him in that moment, not because he deserves sympathy, but because you could see his whole operating system crash. Calvin had spent years treating confidence like a badge, and now every adult in the room was asking to see the actual badge. He did not have one. And just when I thought the HOA consequences were going to be the main event, Officer Daniels called and told me a postal inspector wanted a copy of the footage, because apparently, and somebody intentionally destroys a mailbox tied to active delivery, the situation can stop being cute neighborhood drama very quickly. When Officer Daniels said postal inspector, I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain had run out of appropriate reactions and decided to send up the wrong flare. I asked him if that was normal, and he said, in the driest voice I had ever heard, "Mr. Cole, people are often surprised by how seriously the mail is taken." That sentence stayed with me, because Calvin had treated my mailbox like a lawn ornament with a flag on it, something he could correct with a hammer and a superiority complex, but to the people who actually handled delivery routes and federal mail systems, it was evidence, infrastructure, and someone else's property all racked into one dented metal box. The postal inspector who called me 2 days later was named Karen Willis, and she had the calmest voice I have ever heard from a person who could ruin your week with paperwork. She did not sound angry. She did not sound dramatic. She just asked clean little questions that made the whole thing feel heavier. Did Mr. Brewer have permission to touch the mailbox? No. Was the mailbox active at the time of destruction? Yes. Was there videos showing the act from beginning to end? Yes. Had the placement been confirmed by the association? Yes. There was a pause after that last answer, just long enough for me to understand that Calvin's favorite defense, I thought I was helping, was about to have a very bad day. A week later, Calvin tried one more neighborhood performance, because some men will grab a shovel, even after the hole is deep enough to echo. He showed up at the monthly HOA meeting wearing the same blazer from the hearing. carrying a folder thick enough to suggest either legal preparation or emotional collapse. The room was packed, not because people loved HOA meetings. Nobody loves HOA meetings. But because by then half the neighborhood had lost packages, made extra drives, missed deliveries, or heard the phrase Captain's Sidewalk enough times to want the live show. Calvin stood up during open comments and said he had been unfairly targeted for caring about community safety. Margaret Hensley let him speak. That was the scary part about Margaret. She never interrupted too early. She let people build the entire bridge before asking why it led into a swamp. Calvin said the curve near my driveway had always been dangerous. Said the board ignored resident concerns. Said my mailbox represented a hazard. Said the whole thing had been blown out of proportion by gossip. Then Mr. Alvarez raised his hand from the second row and said, "Calvin, did the mailbox jump into your hammer? Or did your hammer find the mailbox?" The room went quiet for half a second. Then somebody coughed in that way people cough when they are trying not to laugh and failing spiritually. Calvin turned red. Margaret tapped her pen once and asked him, again, whether he had filed a formal safety complaint before taking action. He said he had attempted neighborly resolution. Melissa from the bakery leaned toward Tasha and whispered, "Laminated threats are neighborly now." And that was the end of the room's dignity. Margaret finally closed the folder in front of her and said the board would not revisit the finding. The fines would stand. Restitution would stand. His removal from the Volunteer Advisory Committee would stand. And until the matter with the postal authorities and police report concluded, he was not to contact me, Rachel, or any resident about the incident outside official channels. For the first time since I had known him, Calvin had nothing to say. He just gathered his papers slowly, like each page weighed 5 pounds, and walked out past the same neighbors he had spent years correcting. Nobody blocked him. Nobody insulted him. Nobody gave him the big dramatic confrontation he probably expected. They just watched him leave. And somehow that was worse. After that, things changed fast. The new mailbox went in about 3 weeks after the old one was destroyed, approved by the carrier, confirmed by the association, photographed from more angles than my wedding. And yes, I made sure it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Package delivery returned to normal. Tasha's daughter eventually got her birthday decorations. Melissa got her cupcake boxes. Mr. Alvarez got his prescriptions without turning the post office into a field trip, and Ben and Marcy stopped looking like they were one delayed shipment away from declaring war on the county. But for Calvin, normal did not come back. The fines were not imaginary. The legal fees were not imaginary. The interviews were not imaginary. The embarrassment was not imaginary. What hurt him most, though, was not the money. It was the silence. Before all this, Calvin could step onto a sidewalk and someone would listen. Maybe out of politeness, maybe out of fear, maybe because it was easier than becoming his next project. Afterward, conversations closed when he approached. Garage doors came down. People suddenly remembered phone calls. The man who had built his whole little kingdom on being noticed became invisible in the most public way possible. I will admit something that does not make me look perfect. Part of me enjoyed it. Not every second, not in some cartoon villain way, but there were moments when I would see him standing alone by his spotless SUV, looking around like the neighborhood had changed languages overnight, and I felt that warm little spark of satisfaction people pretend they're too mature to feel. Then I would feel guilty, because watching someone lose their place in a community is not exactly noble entertainment. Rachel put it best one night while we were washing dishes. She said, "I do not feel sorry for what happened to him, but I do feel sad that he needed this much proof to learn other people are real." 4 months later, on a Tuesday morning so ordinary it almost felt staged, a moving truck backed into Calvin's driveway. At first, I thought maybe a relative was moving in, or he was finally replacing that dining room set we could all see through his front window because he never closed the blinds. Then the boxes started coming out. Lamps, chairs, framed pictures. The big patio umbrella he once complained was 2 shades too bright when someone else owned the same color. By noon it was obvious. Calvin Brewer was leaving Willow Creek. And here is the part that felt like the final scene of a movie nobody admitted they were watching. Everyone was outside. Tasha watered plants that had already been watered. Mr. Alvarez swept a clean sidewalk. Melissa adjusted the same porch wreath 6 times. I stood in my garage pretending to organize a shelf that contained 1 screwdriver and a bag of birdseed. Nobody waved. Nobody cheered. Nobody shouted Captain's Sidewalk. Even though I know at least 3 people wanted to. Calvin climbed into his SUV, looked down the street one last time, and for a second, just 1 second, he looked less like a villain and more like a man who had mistaken control for belonging and finally realized they were not the same thing. Then he drove away, and the truck followed, and the street got quiet in a way that felt clean and never got revenge on Calvin. I know some people will call it that, because the ending is satisfying. The guy with the hammer lost more than he expected. But revenge would have meant I pushed the consequences beyond the truth. I did not have to. All I did was save the video, keep the notes, measure what needed measuring, answer the questions, and let the systems he claimed to respect do what systems are supposed to do. That is the strange lesson I took from the whole mess. Rules can protect a community, but in the hands of someone hungry for control, they turn into weapons. And once that happens, a neighborhood stops feeling like a place where people live and starts feeling like a place where everyone is waiting to be accused. Calvin thought he was defending standards. What he really defended was his own need to matter. And maybe that is why the story still bothers me, because the mailbox was easy to replace. The trust was not. So I want to ask you honestly, if you had walked outside before sunrise and found your neighbor destroying your property because he thought he had the right, what would you have done? Would you have stayed calm, saved the footage, and let the paperwork do the talking? Or would Calvin have gotten the driveway confrontation he was clearly begging for? And do you think the consequences went too far? Or was this exactly what happens when someone confuses confidence with authority? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because every neighborhood has rules, every community has conflict, and somewhere out there, I promise you, another captain's sidewalk is just waiting for someone to finally hand him a mirror.